The world was left stunned when Hollywood legend Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Oroa were discovered dead in their Santa Fe home weeks after they had passed. As authorities delved into the case, unsettling signs suggested that someone had known about their deaths long before the official discovery. Suddenly, all eyes turned to Hackman's daughter, Leslie Ann. Could she have been entangled in something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated? What secrets was she keeping, and how far had she gone to conceal the truth? The answers would be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Inside the house, an eerie silence filled the air. The front door was slightly ajar, and piles of unopened mail sat untouched for weeks. A concerned neighbor, sensing that something was wrong, contacted the authorities for a wellness check. Expecting a routine call, officers arrived at the scene only to stumble upon something deeply unsettling. Gene Hackman's lifeless body was slumped near the kitchen in a way that defied explanation. His sunglasses lay beside him as if they had just slipped from his hands. Betsy Oroa was found in the bathroom with scattered pills littering the countertop. The water in the sink had long since evaporated, leaving behind a thin film. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no blood, and no evidence of a struggle. 2 of the couple's dogs were still alive, wandering through the house, while a third had been found dead inside its crate. However, the most chilling detail was the state of the bodies. Their skin had tightened over their bones, and decomposition had slowed, suggesting the early stages of mummification. Investigators concluded that Gene and Betsy had been dead for weeks. The air inside was stagnant, untouched for a long time, and rotting food sat abandoned on the countertops. It was as though time had frozen within the house. One pressing question loomed: how had 2 people, one a famous Hollywood star, remained undiscovered for so long? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Gene Hackman's pacemaker had logged its final activity before shutting down, providing a crucial timestamp. Investigators analyzed the data, and what they uncovered shifted the entire investigation. The pacemaker suggested that Gene had likely died on February 17th. If that was accurate, the house had been lifeless for at least 9 days before authorities arrived. No distress calls had been made, no one had checked in, nothing seemed out of place. Yet, something didn't add up. Why was Betsy in a separate room when Gene collapsed? If she had been alive after his passing, why hadn't she sought help? The slightly open door raised even more suspicion. Had someone entered before the police arrived? Was the door deliberately left that way? Toxicology reports ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning and drug overdose, and with no clear cause of death, the case seemed to reach a standstill. Then, a new revelation changed everything. Surveillance data showed that Gene Hackman's home had been under quiet observation for weeks before his death. Security cameras had detected unusual movement, phone records revealed strange activity, and GPS tracking displayed irregular patterns. Before law enforcement even arrived, someone had already known what had happened inside the house. Shockingly, all digital evidence traced back to one person, Gene Hackman's daughter. The investigation took a sharp turn. Her statements did not align with the evidence. She had claimed to have spoken to her father just weeks before his death, yet phone records suggested otherwise. Financial transactions revealed suspicious inconsistencies. The deeper investigators dug, the more troubling the truth became. The mystery was far from over. The investigators looked deeper and found out something even stranger. There was more to this than just his death. It had to do with money. Documents from Gene's estate had been changed before he was found, before it was even proven that he had died. Someone had already tried to get his money. There was strong proof things were going badly with the case. Was Gene Hackman's death really an accident, or was someone planning something sinister long before he was found? When police looked at Gene Hackman's pacemaker data, the case took a big turn. Just before going quiet, the device had recorded one last movement. It was clear from the timestamp when everything stopped. Everything changed on that date. Investigators looked for signs of life after that day. They checked his phone records: no calls, no texts, no web searches. His financial activities had stopped: no bank logins, no purchases with credit cards. It looked like he had just disappeared. Then, they found something else. Security cameras on a nearby property caught people moving around outside of Hackman's house. There was a shadow near the door. A car was left parked in the street for hours. Inside the house, motion sensors picked up on strange behavior at odd times. The front door was never opened, though someone was watching. But where were they? The police looked at his home security system. The log showed something unsettling. Before he died, the doorbell had been turned off and on several times. No signs of forced entry, no emergency calls, but something didn't make sense. Hackman followed the same routine every day. Every morning he took his dogs for a walk at the same time. He checked his mail. He paid his bills. His life was predictable and easy to track. Back then, all of a sudden, everything stopped. The police dug deeper and found his last digital traces, his last writings, his last web search, his most recent call. Each one ended quickly, no warnings, no farewells. Then, another clue surfaced. Cell tower data showed a strange phone signal near Hackman's house. The number wasn't registered. It kept bouncing between towers, hiding its true origin. The signal appeared the night before his pacemaker recorded its last beat. Someone had been there. Someone knew what had happened. Betsy should have called for help if Hackman had been having a medical emergency, but there was no call. Why didn't she leave the house? If she was still alive after he died, why didn't she tell anyone? The police examined her bank records on February 16th. There was only one small transaction. By itself, it didn't seem significant, but now it appeared to be a digital footprint, a sign of life before everything went dark. That day, both Hackman and his wife passed away. The real question was who had been watching them. Detectives looked for someone who could access the house, someone who had something to gain. That's when their focus shifted. The surveillance records had raised doubts. It was time to uncover the truth, what had been hidden. At first, it wasn't clear who Leslie and Hackman were. People had been focused on the strange timeline, the surveillance footage, and the pacemaker data. As the police delved deeper into the case, they uncovered something that shifted the entire investigation. She had claimed that she last spoke to her father a few weeks before his death, assuring that everything seemed normal with no signs of concern or unusual behavior. However, when authorities examined call logs, they found no records of any calls, texts, or other forms of communication. The timeline she provided didn't align with the evidence. The last recorded interaction between her and her father was much earlier than she had stated. The facts simply didn't support her claims. Investigators then turned their attention to her bank records, expecting to see routine transactions and spending habits. Instead, they discovered something unusual. She had been discussing her father's fortune even before his death was officially confirmed. Legal inquiries were already being raised about the inheritance at a time when no one outside the family had any reason to believe Hackman was missing. Additionally, there were changes made to important documents related to Hackman's assets. The timing of these alterations could not be overlooked by authorities. If these modifications occurred before February 17th, they were not just coincidences, they were deliberate actions. This prompted the government to start asking difficult questions. Did she possess information that others were unaware of? Had she been preparing for something before it actually happened? Her actions only raised further suspicion. When confronted with inconsistencies in her statements, she grew defensive, making her responses even more unclear. She was unable to explain why no records existed of the calls she claimed to have made, nor could she provide a reasonable justification for the financial transactions linked to her name. Then another unsettling revelation surfaced. Hackman's assets were being discussed with a lawyer on the very day his pacemaker registered its last activity. At that point, no public announcement had been made regarding his death. He had been missing for so long that nobody knew his fate, so why were changes being made to his estate? The noose was tightening around her. If she was attempting to gain access to his money, did that mean she knew something about his final moments? The investigation was no longer just about Hackman's death. It had expanded into a larger inquiry, one involving money, fraud, and deception. The mounting evidence suggested that this was more than just a tragic accident. With each new discovery, the walls were closing in. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place, and it was only a matter of time before the police uncovered something that would expose the truth. A secret was on the verge of being revealed, one that once brought to light could not be undone. When the autopsy results arrived, instead of providing answers, they only deepened the mystery. Gene Hackman's body showed no signs of trauma. There were no bruises, broken bones, or defensive wounds, no indications of a struggle or foul play. The same held true for Betsy Oroa. Her body bore no marks of violence, no evidence of a fight, nothing that pointed to an attack. Initially, authorities suspected carbon monoxide poisoning, but that theory was quickly dismissed. Air samples, gas lines, and every other possible source of a leak were thoroughly inspected. No traces of toxic exposure were found. There was no indication that the couple had been exposed to anything that could have silently taken their lives. With environmental poisoning ruled out, investigators were left with an even bigger question: if their deaths weren't the result of physical harm or toxic gases, then what caused them? Toxicology reports followed. There were no traces of pills, no barbiturates, no evidence of an overdose. On paper, their systems appeared completely clean. But then the police stumbled upon something that simply didn't add up. There was a noticeable lack of certain medicines that should have been in the house. Gene Hackman had a history of heart problems and had undergone medical treatments before. He was taking medication to manage his condition. Yet when the police searched the house, those prescriptions were nowhere to be found. This wasn't just a case of misplaced bottles. If he had run out of his medication, there should have been records showing he had obtained more, but there were none. If he had simply stopped taking them, extra pills should have been lying around, but they were missing as well. It appeared as if they had been deliberately removed. This led investigators to a troubling thought: what if Hackman's death wasn't due to external causes, but rather something more deliberate? The possibility arose that someone had intentionally ensured he never received the medical help he needed. Whether through neglect or direct interference, both could be fatal. The autopsy report suggested that the same outcome could have occurred if someone had withheld his medication, obstructed medical care, or passively allowed his condition to worsen. There were no signs of struggle, no sudden trauma, just a slow, inevitable decline. Authorities then turned their attention to Betsy's untouched pills. If she had been experiencing a medical emergency, why hadn't she taken them? Why hadn't she called for help? Perhaps she was too weak to do so, or perhaps something or someone had prevented her. The disappearance of the medicine changed everything. It suggested intent, pointing toward a deliberate action rather than an unfortunate accident. What had initially seemed like an unexpected tragedy was now raising serious suspicions. The police were no longer investigating just a death, they were considering the possibility of a calculated scheme, one orchestrated by someone with everything to gain. Almost immediately, a battle over Gene Hackman's estate began. His vast wealth, accumulated over decades in Hollywood, became entangled in legal disputes. Even before his passing, investigators had uncovered suspicious activity involving his finances, but the real shock came when they examined his will. Several pages were missing, and key details had been altered. Before Hackman had even been officially declared dead, someone had been tampering with his legal documents. The timing was impossible to ignore. The paper trail repeatedly pointed to Leslie and Hackman. For some time before her father's body was discovered, she had been inquiring about his money. Her lawyers admitted she had attempted to modify estate documents, but the issue was that she had no legal right to do so. However, financial records and transactions suggested that someone had been preparing for the transfer of wealth well in advance. Investigators pieced together the timeline. Hackman's will had been reviewed, altered, and sent to an attorney while he was still missing. The question now was whether this was just strategic planning, or if Leslie had known her father was already gone. Legal experts had differing views on the changes made to the estate. Some believed they were attempts to secure a larger portion of the inheritance, while others suspected outright fraud. If Leslie had been preparing for her father's passing, what else had she planned? The legal battle escalated as missing pages, financial discrepancies, and contested inheritance claims surfaced at the worst possible moment. Prosecutors began assembling a case, uncovering a clear financial trail. This was no longer just about estate disputes, it was a story of deception, greed, and the length someone might go to in pursuit of wealth. As the case proceeded in court, Leslie Hackman was about to receive a verdict she never anticipated. With the estate battle intensifying, her suspicious actions raised serious concerns. The focus of the investigation had now shifted almost entirely to Leslie Hackman. Too many warning signs had emerged regarding her role in the estate dispute. Determined to uncover the truth, authorities placed her under constant surveillance, monitoring her every move, phone call, email, and financial transaction. What they discovered was deeply unsettling. Her bank records revealed a hidden story. Unusual transaction alerts raised suspicions. Funds had been transferred between different banks, and some withdrawals were made in amounts small enough to avoid detection. These financial movements took place at odd hours, some even occurring before Gene Hackman was officially declared dead. Investigators examined private emails, uncovering chilling details. Messages exchanged with lawyers suggested something troubling. Leslie had been discussing the estate long before there was any public reason to do so. On paper, her father was still alive, yet she had already begun making inquiries about estate claims, as if she had been preparing for an event she knew was inevitable. Phone records provided further damning evidence. The timeline revealed that she had consulted financial experts, transferred assets, and attempted to fast-track legal proceedings while the public still believed Gene Hackman was alive. Her actions suggested certainty that her father was no longer involved. The most incriminating evidence came from a forensic audit of bank transactions. Large sums of money had quietly been moved into private accounts, some of which were traced to offshore banks, making them difficult to track. It became clear that Leslie had been shifting funds long before she should have had access to them. At this stage, there was no room for speculation. The surveillance footage, financial records, and legal documents all pointed to the same conclusion. This was not the case of a grieving daughter managing her father's affairs. It was a calculated financial scheme. The evidence was undeniable. Surveillance footage, altered legal paperwork, and suspicious bank transactions all pointed to one individual. Even before Gene Hackman had been officially pronounced dead, Leslie had already set her plan into motion. The investigation revealed a pattern of deception, fraud, and interference. Justice had to be served. The police were called, she was arrested, charged, and taken into custody immediately. Prosecutors acted swiftly, presenting a case that unfolded like a meticulously arranged puzzle. Every missing page from the will, premature land claims, and undisclosed transactions fit together, exposing how she had attempted to manipulate the system. It became clear that she had been preparing for her father's death long before it was publicly known. The verdict came quickly. As a consequence, she lost all rights to Gene Hackman's estate. She was convicted on multiple counts of theft, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. Every dollar, asset, and legal connection to her father was stripped away. Her name was permanently removed from the inheritance. She had gambled everything on a scheme that ultimately crumbled before her eyes. Now she was left with nothing, no money, no claim to her father's legacy, a complete and final downfall. Yet even after the sentencing, lingering questions remained. What truly happened in Gene Hackman's final days? Had Leslie simply taken advantage of an opportunity, or was there something even more sinister at play? Though the case had reached its conclusion, the mystery persisted. Some believe that the full truth had yet to be revealed. The secrets surrounding Gene Hackman's last days may never be fully uncovered. What do you think really happened? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click on the next video popping up on your screen.